Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 4 of season 2 of Arrow called Crucible. And again, this show is really firing on all cylinders. This is a really great episode. We'll talk about the big reveal, in quotes, in a moment. But yeah, this episode, very solid one. Lots of stuff happens. Lots of interesting stuff going on with the characters. Some nice shout outs to the comics. We really I don't think, can ask for much more than what we're getting here. Anyway, so let's just kind of get the big thing out of the way. And oh yeah, Black Canary is Sarah Lance. Well, we all kind of saw this coming. I mean, really, this is so not a shock. I mean, it should turn out it was like, oh, I'm Black Canary, and my name is Wendy Perkins, and we've never met before. Well, who cares? This is a perfect example of one of those things. Like a character like Spider-Man is a perfect example of this. And so many superheroes since Peter Parker came around have followed this. Is that the villains often have some kind of a personal connection to the hero. For example, like in Spider-Man, we have Venom, who has personal connections to him. Dr. Octopus once tried to marry Aunt May because she had inherited a nuclear power plant that he wanted access to. Yes, that really did happen in the comics. There have been any number of characters who have personal ties to him. Molten Man is the brother-in-law of basically the first girl who was ever introduced as a potential love interest for Peter, Liz Allen. And there's just so many other examples that go that way. And it's not even just villains. His classmate Sally Averill became the hero. Was it Blue Jay? Okay, so here again with this episode, we see someone from Oliver's past who has strong emotional ties to, and she's become Black Canary. Now, I've seen some people saying, well, if Laurel ever does take up the mantle of Black Canary, this will be diminished because there was already a Black Canary before her. Well, keep in mind, folks, and I believe I mentioned this last time around, there have been 2 Black Canaries in the history of comics. And someone taking over the role of a hero or a villain even, and then trying to really make their bones in the suit to live up to the predecessor. Well, a lot of good stories have come out of that very thing. So if Laurel does ultimately end up taking up the mantle, it really doesn't diminish her, it doesn't diminish Sarah, it doesn't diminish the name of Black Canary in any way, shape, or form, unless the writers do a bad job of it. And given the performance so far, I don't think that's going to happen. The people on this show are really knocking it out of the park. Anyway, so let's kind of start talking about the characters, and we'll kind of move into the plot. So let's get the smaller things out of the way first. Now, let's talk about the mayor briefly. As far as one-shot villains go, he wasn't bad. I really did like the fellow that they had play the mayor. Did a nice job, came across as very charismatic, came across as threatening. And he makes a little speech about how before the quake he was nobody, just some guy working a job worrying about getting fired by his boss. Well, the mayor is illustrating how a single negative event, one bad day, as it's so often described in comics, can turn an ordinary and good person into a monster. The most popular origin for the Joker, for example, the one from The Killing Joke, written by the legendary Alan Moore, really very much revolves around this. And it focuses on the Joker basically trying to give Commissioner Gordon one bad day and to snap him, to drive him insane, to make him as crazy as he is. And of course the Joker has tried this sort of thing with Batman and Superman and other heroes because, he's the Joker and that's what he does. But the mayor is an example of this idea taken and carried out. One ordinary guy, he sees the world around him literally fall apart, and he reinvents himself as someone who is almost an embodiment of the idea of live by the sword. Strength gives you the right to be in charge. Might makes right. Yes, that's what I'm going for. The mayor comes around as a guy who, after coming through his crucible of the destruction of the Glades, came out of there as an advocate for might makes right. And of course, Arrow and Black Canary take him down, and he meets a rather interesting fate. I'm actually a little sorry the fellow didn't survive all of that, because it might have been interesting to see him again. But let's face it, the mayor never really struck me as somebody who there was going to be, a huge amount of potential for character-wise. So, maybe it's better he left the stage when he did. Moving on to the more minor character stuff, we've got more interaction between Roy and Sin, and it looks like they might have a little bit of chemistry there going on there. But if they're going to try and kind of create some love triangle with Roy, Sin, and Thea, I can't really say that I'm hugely jazzed about that, because it just doesn't really feel necessary. Now, if they were to do some sort of situation where Roy and Sin, obviously people who are cut from very similar cloth, and if Thea starts feeling some unjustified jealousy because sees them becoming friends, developing a close relationship, and Thea becomes jealous unreasonably, well, okay, there's more interesting story potential there. Because I really can't say I see Roy wanting to look at pursuing other girls in a really serious sort of way. His relationship with Thea is something that's really one of the big things in his life, and it's, for a guy from the Glades, this is the one-in-a-million relationship. That's the sort of thing that he could never have imagined happening to him, and yet here it is. Roy's got the cool girlfriend, Roy's errand boy for the vigilante. His life is actually pretty darn good. So I really can't see him chucking that away for, without a better reason than just like Sin has and I have more in common than Thea and I do. But keep in mind, Thea and Roy have been through stuff together. All right, they survived the destruction of the Glades together. That counts for a lot. Let me see here. Nothing really big to say about Diggle this episode. Just it was nice to see him interacting with the Argus agent lady, Lila, I believe her name is, codename Harbinger. I'm still very happy about that little nod to Crisis on Infinite Earths from last season. Now Argus being around, I'm glad they brought these guys back, because there is just so much potential with Argus being around. Especially if this could somehow maybe lead into something like Suicide Squad. We've already seen that China White and Bronze Tiger have been captured by the authorities, and they're exactly the sort of villains that Suicide Squad would go for. And if you're not familiar with Suicide Squad from the comics, basically the government would take captured supervillains and send them on suicide missions with the understanding if you do enough of these suicide missions for us and survive, we'll give you a pardon. Now, granted, I'm kind of running with speculation here a little bit, which is not something I normally do, but after just like the really strong hints that we might see some kind of incarnation of the Birds of Prey from last episode, I'm running on a little bit of fanboy adrenaline here. So here's hoping, because I've read some Suicide Squad stories, and when they're done well, they're done really, really well. They're good stuff. Oh, and incidentally, a guy well known to be a member of Suicide Squad, Deadshot. That could be potentially very ugly. And of course, there is some hints that, which does actually seem to follow up what we saw last season, that Layla is open to a potential romantic relationship with Dig. Now, I think Dig's a little too fresh off of Carly for this to be viable, but hey, why not? It would certainly, it's potentially very interesting. So hey, give things a little time for some water to go under the bridge. Yeah, Dig, go for it. Nothing really huge to say about Felicity this episode. Now we finally get to see some more of Isabel Rochov, and give Summer Glau some credit. She definitely does know how to portray Isabel as a horribly, horribly unlikable person. Although she also comes across as a rather irrational person. Like her saying that she's Oliver's superior, and Oliver says like, "Well, no, we're partners," and she quickly goes like, "On paper." Well, I really, seeing as how you both own equal shares in the company, um, yeah, I really don't see how you have any kind of. I really don't see how you can put any real weight to that. I think this is really more a situation in her own mind. Now, granted, she's obviously the person who is more experienced in business. She's an experienced corporate raider, and Oliver is a guy who doesn't even have an MBA. So, yeah, so she is the more experienced person in the relationship, but, debate, she might want to try and chalk this up as to Oliver playing semantics, but I can't say that I really come down on her side in that argument. And what in the world is with her getting on this whole thing about Oliver spending his own money to sponsor the gun buyback? Okay, it's not unreasonable for her to say, hey, you can't spend corporate funds on this, at least not if you're not going to put our name on it. Corporations donate big monies, make large donations to charity because they want good publicity. But again, this is Oliver's personal money. He even says, okay, fine, I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. And then she's still complaining at him. Like, look, lady, what do you care what Oliver Queen does with his money? If he blows his money on something stupid, guess what? You're in a much better position to scoop up that stock and take full control of Queens Consolidated, and then you can tear the company apart for your own profit. You should be encouraging him to do stupid things with his money. As much as I really just cannot fathom what in the world the writers were thinking on that one. Like I said, I've sung the writers on this show's praises many, many times, but this is one where I have to go, just throw up my hands and say, guys, I have no idea what you're thinking. Not that I haven't had my criticisms of the writers of this show, but yeah. But anyway, despite how my reviews may sometimes come across, I really do prefer to try and emphasize the positive in what it is that I review, because one, if you want people who are going to sit there and complain endlessly about every little negative thing that they can find in something, well, YouTube is full of those people. But not to get too philosophical, my feeling is the world is already filled with plenty of negativity. Let's try and spend a little time talking about the good things in life, because life is short and we should enjoy it while we can. But anyway, back to the TV show about the vigilante who shoots people with cool arrows and wears green. Let me see here. Yeah, I think it's kind of time to start getting into what's going on with our main characters this time around. First of all, let's give some serious props to Paul Blackthorne. Now, occasionally letting his British accent slip in there aside, he's done a really good job on this show. This guy, his stock has really, really shot up in my book since he started appearing on Arrow, and I was already quite fond of him for no other reason than the Dresden Files, short-lived though it was. But yeah, here, like that scene with him at the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and his trying to reason with Laurel, and his going and asking Oliver Queen, a guy who he pretty much flat out hated last season, for help. Man, this just really shows how much Quentin has changed. And this is in addition to him being willing to work with the vigilante. Quentin's a guy who has been through some stuff, but he has come out of it stronger and more dedicated than ever to doing what is right, to doing what is best for the people that he loves. He's not somebody who's letting his anger and his loss define him. He's letting the things that he has and what he can do, the good he can do with his life, he's letting those things define him. And that is what we should all do. Okay? Amazingly enough, I'm going to spare you my somewhat possibly preachy ramblings on philosophical points on this one. I'll probably get into some more of that later because that's what I do. There may or may not be a little bit of alcohol in this. But anyway, like I said, Paul Blackthorne really knocks it out of the park here. And that speech he gives to Laurel, and we'll talk some more about Laurel in just a second, where he kind of really lays his heart out on the line, explains to her, like, Laurel, I understand what it is you are going through. And Laurel does not respond well to that. I mean, she even basically tries to throw it in his face, like, oh, you're saying that I have a problem with booze, Dad? You were a full-blown alcoholic for a long time, and, look at the pain that caused me. Now, Laurel does have a legitimate point here, but, yeah, let's look at what he says. Imagine that, some, tweaker meth head comes to you and says, you shouldn't do meth. Meth is bad. Meth will mess up your life. Is that person a hypocrite? Well, definitely, yeah, you can certainly say, you're telling me not to do something that you yourself do. Yes, okay, in this instance, that person is a hypocrite. But being a hypocrite does not automatically invalidate a point you're trying to make. I mean, yes, the tweaker might be a hypocrite, but they're not lying to you. It is completely true that doing meth is bad for you. Doing drugs will potentially ruin your life, and that it's really generally not a good idea to do drugs. And this is exactly where Quentin is coming from. He's like saying, you don't want to do the things that I have done. And let's be completely fair to Quentin. That's in the past for him. He's really just trying to spare Laurel from going down a bad road that he himself has walked. And Laurel is, frankly, just too wrapped up in her own pain to really give a crap about what anybody else is saying to her or what anyone else is feeling. And while this certainly makes Laurel seem unlikable, it also makes Laurel an interesting character. Now, I'm a big fan of the idea, and especially strongly advocated by George R.R. Martin of Game of Thrones fame, that characters do not necessarily have to be likable for audiences to be into them. Audiences will be into a character so long as they are interesting. And let's face it, there are plenty of very bad people on Game of Thrones who are nonetheless very interesting, like Tywin Lannister. Not a nice guy, but he's an interesting guy. Queen Cersei, not a nice person, but an interesting person. And from what I've heard, there's no shortage of that over on the show Mad Men, which is on my big list of shows I need to get around to watching one of these days. But anyway, getting back to Laurel. Now, granted, Laurel's had a tough time of it. The guy that she cared about died. She blames herself for his death. Not entirely unreasonably, because you should have just gotten the heck out of the Glades, Laurel. There's also the fact that she was just recently kidnapped by the dollmaker and almost murdered. Her sister is dead. Her mom is never around. It's not being Laurel Lance is not the funnest thing in the world. But let's keep in mind, yes, her sister's dead, but so is her father's daughter. Her mother isn't around, but neither is Quentin's wife. Laurel was almost murdered by the dollmaker. Quentin almost watched her be murdered by the dollmaker. And Quentin had to listen on the phone while the dollmaker murdered another woman. Oh yeah, and then there's all the women that the dollmaker murdered before. And Quentin is still haunted by all this. And then she goes and starts giving Oliver grief. Like, yeah, the guy who was stuck on that island, as far as you know, by himself for 5 years, can't come back, got his life together, all without apparently spending one moment on the couch of a psychologist. Yeah, Laurel, Oliver's totally completely free of pain of his horrible experience on that island. I'm sure he can't comprehend any of the sort of emotional trauma that you've been through. Now, granted, oh yeah, and his mother is on trial for mass murder. His company is on the verge of being completely destroyed. Yeah, Oliver can't even imagine anything close to the sort of pain that you're going through, Laurel. Not exactly likable, but interesting. Now then, of course, this all brings us to Sarah Lance being revealed to be Black Canary. Now, as I said, this is completely obvious, but I did like that. I didn't like the characters like Team Arrow. I didn't immediately see that it was Laurel that Sarah was watching over instead of trying to figure out following around Oliver. That was a nice twist, and I love stuff that, when in retrospect, makes perfect sense, but that you don't see coming nonetheless. That's a mark of good writing. Now, we also sort of start to get some clues as to what happened to Sarah after she was washed away on the Queen's Gambit. Now, okay, just the way that she reacts so poorly to men, doesn't like being called a bitch. Understandable. I don't think very many women enjoy that sort of thing. And let's not give into the whole reclamatory use of the word. That's totally beyond what we talk about here. We're geeks talking about superhero TV shows. All right, this ain't college. This ain't college debate class. Oh man, arguing with people in college. I cannot believe how much time I've wasted having stupid, pointless arguments with people in college. But then, hey, that's what college is for, right? Yep. Okay, so anyway, let's just kind of get right down to it. Just the kind of vibe that you pick up from what's going on with Sarah, you get the feeling that there's probably going to be some rape-related trauma down the road. At least that's what I'm thinking. And that's a rough subject to talk about in any way, shape, or form. But until it happens, we're just going to put that issue off to the side, and if and when it does come up, we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to try to have a respectful and reasonable conversation to the best of my abilities. Until then, yeah, I don't want to play with fire because well, I've seen more than a few conversations on the internet go start down that way and end up going down in flames, and I don't want that here. We're all just friendly folks having a conversation about a TV show. Now, anyway, whatever. Now, what Oliver? I do like that conversation that Oliver has with her after he shoots an arrow at her rather than just saying hello, which, probably the more reasonable choice. But then again, Sarah didn't exactly seem like she wanted to hang around and talk, so maybe Oliver figured, he should just kind of cut to the chase, or, shoot an arrow at her to avoid having to chase her down fully later. Whatever. So, and I do like that Dig and Felicity really get on his case. It's like, you lied. You said that she died on the Queen's Gambit, and that then you saw her on the island. And, well, technically this is true, but Oliver, you should, and especially like how they say, like, you should have told them about that. Like, well, I think Oliver's completely right when he says, like, look, that wouldn't have made them feel any better about the situation, and I swear to you, as far as I was concerned, I thought Sarah really was dead. Now, I think Oliver, at this point, kind of owes Felicity and Dig some details about what's going on, what happened on that island. And them not pressing him about this seems really... Well, basically, I think they really should have, at this point, pressed him for more details as to what was going on in that island, but we'll leave that aside. But it is interesting to see where, at the end of the episode, where Oliver is reunited with Sarah, and it looks like she's one of the crew of the Amazo, and that she's going to be there to torture him. And wow, I mean, what a twist. Black Canary and Green Arrow are so often in the comics, basically for decades, have been portrayed as partners and lovers. They were even married at one point. Now, granted, that's not with the character. Well, that's basically not with the interpretation of the character that we're dealing with here on the show. But the idea of them being like Black Canary torturing Green Arrow, like holy smokes! I mean, wow, that's definitely a twist. But what I do like about this relationship is ultimately, yes, they do obviously have some ugly history. But Oliver is not letting whatever happened between them on the island and on that ship stop him from wanting to help her. Because there's nobody out there who understands whatever Sarah has gone through better than Oliver. Sarah is thinking like, I can't go back. I can't go and reconnect with my father and my sister as much as I want to. I mean, just the look on her face when she hears her father's voice again, asking Oliver to help Laurel. Help Laurel. What Sarah really wants to do more than anything, but can't. All she can really do is watch, and if something seems to be threatening her, to strike from the shadows. But she can't bring herself to go and offer some sisterly comfort. The thing she would obviously most want to do in the world. But Oliver is living proof that whatever happened on the island, whatever happened on the Amazo, whatever happened in that time, you can come back from that. You can step out of that crucible. You don't have to live there. You don't have to live in that fire, in that pain. It's not an easy path. Look at how Oliver was in the first episode, and look at where he is now. It took time for Oliver to come back, to find his way back, not just physically, but emotionally, to his sister, to his mother, to his new stepfather, to his best friend, to the woman he loved, to pursuing relationships with other women whom he had genuine feelings for, to making friends with people like Dig and Felicity. Oliver's a guy with problems, but he's not a guy who lacks people that care about him. All Sarah has is Sin, and while they obviously care about each other, Sin is no sister, at least no blood sister. Sin isn't her father. And she can try and fill that void, but she can't truly. And I love how at the end of this episode, it's not really about Black Canary and Green Arrow. Green Arrow doesn't save Black Canary. Oliver Queen helps Sarah Lance. Now, where's it all going to go? Well, I think we can safely say that Laurel and Sarah are going to come face to face with each other at some point in this season. Wouldn't be much fun if they didn't. But where do Black Canary and Green Arrow, where do Oliver and Sarah go from here? Well, like I said, in the comics, Green Arrow and Black Canary have a very long history of being partners. And there's probably room in that Arrow lair for one more. Wouldn't that be interesting? Anyway, let's talk briefly about some of the little continuity nods. First of all, this is one I've been actually forgetting to mention for a while, is if you notice the news reporter that we keep seeing, Bethany Snow, she is indeed a character from the comics, albeit a fairly minor one, who actually has some connections to Brother Blood, who we'll talk about in a sec. And she is, of course, broadcasts on Channel 52. The number 52 has popped up quite a bit in this show. And of course, this is a reference to the New 52 from DC Comics, the 52 new titles that they had when they relaunched the DC Universe, the 52 alternate Earths that were part of the DC multiverse for a while. So yeah, I fully expect that we'll be seeing the number 52 quite a bit. Now anyway, before I forget about it, let's talk briefly about Brother Blood. Honestly, the whole thing with the mask, I was shocked. I did not have any idea who that was when I was looking for him. Like, is that Black Mask? Is he going to be a villain on this episode? I mean, this season 2? Now, granted, in the comics, Brother Blood does kind of wear a mask, but it's actually a little bit more like kind of a helmet in most incarnations of the character, although there have been some where he has sort of a skull thing covering this part of his face. It sort of depends on the artist. But seeing him wearing that, I was like, Wow, and the fact that the cop even flat out referred to him as Brother Blood, I just did not see that. This is apparently he's going to be a little bit more true to his interpretation in the comics than I was expecting. Now, in the comics, well, long story short, Brother Blood is starts off, and I've actually read the first story that introduced him back in like the 80s. Brother Blood was actually the ruler of this tiny little postage stamp sized nation in Europe that was run by his religion, the Cult of Blood. And this is just such a weird, creepy, scary place that when World War II broke out, this is explicitly spelled out in the comics, and you even see a scene of this. Hitler refused to send German troops into Brother Blood's country. He just flat out says, like, no, leave that country alone. We don't want to screw with those guys. And the Church of Blood are kind of big on human sacrifice. And in the comics, during the Jeff Johns run on Teen Titans, it was actually ultimately revealed that the Church of Blood were actually worshippers of the demon Trigon. And if you're a fan of Teen Titans, you know that the demon Trigon is the father of longtime Titans member Raven, and is actually quite a scary dude. And I don't know if we're going to see that incorporated in here. Like I've said, I think it would be very interesting if they started to include some of the supernatural elements of the DC universe at some point. But either way, I'm very, very interested to see just how true to his comics interpretation this incarnation of Brother Blood ends up being. Now, getting into it, we also saw. Oh yes, of course we can't forget about the really awesome scene where Oliver uses Black Canary's staff and Sarah uses Oliver's arrows. They're both very effective. Not only is it a cool scene, it kind of hints that maybe their training shares some similar origins, or at least part of it. And of course, we also get to see Oliver having a conversation with a Russian dude down on the ship. I think this is pretty safe to say this is probably going to be our opening to learning more about how Oliver became a captain in the Bratva. And do keep in mind, the guy, I can't even remember exactly what the guy's name is supposed to be, who got him into the Bratva, is the Arrow universe's counterpart to the KGB assassin known as KG Beast. Yeah, comics from the 80s, huh? Oh, and of course we can't forget that it was repeatedly mentioned that the military weapons were coming from Camp Kirby. This is, of course, to the legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby, best known for creating about half of the original Marvel Universe, co-creator of guys like the Hulk and the Fantastic Four, and just so many other iconic Marvel characters. But what a lot of people forget is that he actually did quite a bit of respectable work over at DC, with his best known creation probably being, at least at DC, being the villainous world conqueror and ruler of the evil planet Apocalypse, Darkseid. And if you're familiar with the DC universe, especially in the animated incarnations, you're probably quite familiar with Darkseid. He's basically one of the DC universe's top-ranked villains, and deservedly so. Darkseid is a great villain, and I love how even like the superheroes are like, Darkseid, oh crap, this is really bad. And let me see. Yeah, I think that kind of wraps that up. Kind of wraps everything up. Anyway, before we go, I want to give you guys a little bit of channel news. This is stuff that's still in the very, very early stages. I'm talking with people. We're still hammering it out. But I've come to into a little bit of a partnership. Like I said, we're still hammering out all the details with the folks at DCComicsNews.com. And it's a website and Facebook group that's dedicated to giving you guys out there all the latest news about the DC, what's going on in the DC comics. And of course, they do give us information on what's going on with the various animated DC properties. We're getting news about what's going on with Arrow there. And I've actually been invited to be a guest at some point on their Arrow podcast. We haven't hammered out any dates just yet, but like I said, this is still the early stages. And I have actually been asked to kind of give a little plug to two other contributors to the site, and you can find the links to their channels down in the description of this episode. One of them is to a channel run by this lady named Ariel, and she's there delivering her thoughts on the various comics that come out every week. So, if you're like me, I definitely do enjoy hearing what other people say about comics every week. So check her out. And we also have a lady named Kim. She does a weekly vlog about pretty much everything that's going on related to various DC things. Also very fun to watch. She's a lady with quite a bit of energy. So, like I said, you can find the links to their channels down in the description, and also put up the link to DC Comics News. Do check those guys out if you've got some time. And anyway, that is it for the commercial portion of our program. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.